Have you ever paused to wonder whether the system that promised to educate you quietly trained you to doubt yourself? Picture a child with unruly curiosity, hands in the dirt, eyes on the clouds, a question for every minute. Now seat that child at a desk under clocks and rules. Speak only with permission, sit still, follow the schedule. Repeat for years. If you hesitate before sharing an idea, or wait for permission before you try, consider this. Perhaps that hesitation is not your personality, but a trained reflex. Think of school as an invisible machine. Its gears are timetables, bells, rubrics, and rankings. Its oil is comparison. Its product is compliance. We are told it prepares us for life, and it does, so long as life means fitting into someone else's calendar. Arthur Schopenhauer saw this clearly. Our most valuable insights, he argued, often arrive in spite of institutional education. Knowledge worth having grows in solitude, reflection, and honest contact with reality. Facts memorized for a test prove short-lived and spiritually thin. Here's the first wound. The lesson that standing out is dangerous. We are coached to prize obedience over originality and to chase badges over truth. We learn to raise our hand to speak, to ignore our body's rhythms, to submit attention to the clock. That is not education in the classical sense. It is training in the modern one. Its aim is less to form a person than to manufacture a reliable worker, a compliant consumer, a quiet citizen who knows how to wait, how to copy, and how to ask for instructions. When a child's curiosity spills beyond the syllabus, the child is relabeled, distracted, disruptive, a problem to manage. Yet Schopenhauer observed that while talent hits a target others can hit, genius hits a target no one else can see. Systems built to manage the median rarely welcome invisible bullseyes. The cost is not only intellectual. There's an ache that lingers when a teacher's sarcasm lands hard, when a grade whispers not enough, when a song or drawing is mocked in a hand that made it never dares again. Friedrich Nietzsche warned that systems of control survive by weakening the individual. Taming the human animal is not a mistake. It is the mission. Once conditioned, we export classroom reflexes into adult life. We hunt for gold stars disguised as titles, certificates, metrics, blue check marks, and likes. We become fluent at role-playing yet fuzzy about who we are without the costume. So ask a harder question. What if burnout, gray anxiety, and the numb confusion so many adults confess are not private flaws, but predictable outcomes of an upbringing that rewarded answers over inquiry? School excels at telling us what to think. It is clumsy at teaching how. That is why Schopenhauer and Nietzsche both press solitude and self-examination on anyone who wants to be free. Freedom begins when you step out of the herd long enough to hear your own step, and to notice the echo of your own voice. How do you loosen programming layered on for years? Start by noticing the classroom that still lives inside you, the raised hand that trembles before you speak a necessary truth, the urge to ask permission from faceless authority, the panic at a blank page because no rubric explains what earns an A. These are not quirks. They are echoes, and once you learn to hear them, you can learn to quiet them. Naming them is the first act of rebellion, because it restores choice where habit once ruled. To understand those echoes, look at the origin story. Modern schooling did not descend from the sky as a neutral vessel for wisdom. It grew alongside factories that required punctuality, discipline, and unquestioning execution. Its blueprint remains visible. Bells like shift whistles, destined rows, subjects chopped into periods, students sorted by data manufacture, age, not appetite. The aim was not to awaken a human being, but to produce a reliable unit for an economy. Efficiency the virtue, conformity the method. Consider what fell through the cracks. Emotional literacy, the ability to name and regulate feelings, was rarely prioritized. Existential questioning, the kind that keeps a person honest, was waved aside as not on the test. At 18, many were steered into decades of decisions shaped by scores, prestige, and perceived safety, not by the slow discovery of what they loved enough to suffer for. Over time, the child who asked why 100 times a day learned the safer question. Will this be on the exam? That pivot is the quiet erosion of a mind. The damage survives graduation. We carry forward a fear of visible failure, a habit of deferring to experts even when our gut protests, a discomfort with uncertainty that makes us overplan life and underlive it. We can become exemplary professionals and yet feel hollow, as if we are acting out competence while starving for meaning. Nietzsche called this the death of authenticity, accepting herd values without inspection until you are misaligned with your own nature. Schopenhauer, gloomier but clarifying, believed that while life is riddled with suffering, a sober freedom appears when we face it without comforting illusions. Both men converge on a single demand: do not reach for a prettier mask. Take the mask off. Then ask again, what is education when it is true? Not the stuffing of disconnected facts into short-term memory or the sprint toward another credential, but the practice of learning how to think and the courage to explore ideas that unsettle the story you inherited. Carl Jung echoed the point in psychological language. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you are. How can anyone become if, since childhood, they have been trained to play someone else? The Greeks named education paideia and meant the sculpting of the soul. Philosophy, poetry, music, ethics, and the training of the body formed a whole. The aim was not a cog that fits, but a person who stands. We traded that vision for throughput and metrics, and the person shrank to a profile. Hence Nietzsche's call to a spiritual rebellion, not vandalism, but the moral responsibility to become real. He who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow. He reminded us, a why is not issued by a registrar. It is discovered in solitude, doubt, service, and trials that escape grading schemes. Can you remember a time your curiosity was punished, your creativity mocked, your voice quieted? Those small humiliations teach a rule. Do not be too loud, too different, too much. But forgetting is not destiny. Here is the consolation. The ache you carry from school is not proof that you failed. It is evidence that you were shaped. What was installed can be uninstalled. What was buried can be recovered. The first move is to rehabilitate discomfort. From childhood, we are trained to cling to certainty, to treat mistakes as moral stains, to dodge the unknown. Nietzsche flips the script. You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. Chaos, confusion, conflict, unanswered questions is not an error. It is raw material. Jung explains how the past persists. The parts of us who were ordered to suppress. Wildness, grief, indignation, originality do not disappear. They go underground into what he called the shadow, where they pull strings from behind curtains. Much of that shadow is cast in childhood by systems that reward politeness and punish authenticity. When we live by those suppressions, we become strangers to ourselves. Healing begins when we make the shadow conscious, name the exiles, and invite them back into the circle of your life. This takes courage because the world arranges itself around your older, compliant identity. As you unlearn, some structures will creak. You may realize you were never meant for 8 hours of stillness. You may discover that your intelligence is musical or bodily or relational, forms a rubric cannot see. That realization requires no credential and seeks no permission. Once you taste it, debate will not erase it. And once you move with it, the map you were handed loses its authority over your next step. Begin with solitude. For Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, solitude was not punishment. It was a laboratory of clarity. Walks without noise, rooms without applause, pages without an audience. These are not luxuries, but tools. He who cannot obey himself will be commanded, Nietzsche warned. To obey yourself, you must practice hearing your own voice. Then pursue meaning as Viktor Frankl described it. Not a toy to chase, but a responsibility to accept. Discover where your gifts meet the world's needs. Let this be your invitation to begin again today. This is only the beginning. In the next part, we will trace how the factory logic of schooling still shapes our thinking today and how to rebuild an education worthy of human life. For now, ask yourself, what part of you did you leave behind in the classroom? And is it time to go back for it? Truth 16. Healing will make you unrecognizable to those who only knew you broken. They'll look at you and say you've changed, and they're right. But what they really mean is, you are no longer easy to exploit. Your silence was their safety net. Your suffering was their comfort. Now that you've outgrown it, they don't know where to place you anymore. Truth 17. If love isn't allowed to evolve, it will expire. Relationships don't collapse because of disagreements. They collapse when one person grows while the other refuses. Love that doesn't adapt rots quietly in the shadows, leaving you both clinging to a corpse that once felt alive. Truth 18. People fear your boundaries only when they benefited from your lack of them. They'll call you cold, harsh, guarded. But that's projection. What they're really saying is, your self-respect now limits my control. Truth 19. When you stop over-explaining, manipulators lose their grip. They thrive on confusion. They feed on endless conversations, twisting words until you're too exhausted to fight back. But once your truth becomes non-negotiable, there's nothing left for them to twist. Clarity is not a debate, it's a wall. Truth 20. Empathy is only a gift when protected by discernment. Your compassion is not meant to be currency. Yet so many of us give it away freely to those who see it as access, not intimacy. Jung would remind you, love without discernment is just a contract for self-erasure. Truth 21. The desire to be understood will make you tolerate the intolerable. You explain yourself to people who never intended to understand. But the problem isn't your clarity. It's their comfort. Truth 22. When someone crosses your boundary and then gets offended, you've exposed their entitlement. Healthy people adjust when you express a need. Unhealthy people retaliate, not because you're wrong, but because they were never planning to respect you in the first place. Truth 23. You are not responsible for the emotional reactions of those you've outgrown. Guilt will whisper, be softer, be nicer, don't hurt them. But growth isn't cruelty. It's clarity. If your evolution wounds them, it's not your job to shrink to their limits. Truth 24. People don't leave because you became toxic. They leave because you became self-respecting. The moment you stand up for yourself, some people disappear. Not because you've done wrong, but because you're no longer easy to use. Truth 25. Your triggers are not flaws. They are messengers. When someone calls you too reactive, you would ask, what memory just got touched? Your emotions are not defects. They're information, pointing you toward what still needs healing. Truth 26. Projection is the mirror people fear the most. They accuse you of being manipulative when you set boundaries. They call you selfish when you ask for space. But often, what they're pointing at in you is what they refuse to see in themselves. Truth 27. Some people are addicted to your dysfunction because it validates their own. You're easy to be around when you're anxious, when you doubt yourself, when you overgive. But the moment you heal, they feel naked because your clarity exposes their chaos. Truth 28. When someone withdraws love as punishment, it was never love. It was leverage. You know that feeling. The cold shoulder after you said no. The silence when you stood your ground. That wasn't love leaving. That was control crumbling. Truth 29. You don't have to explain your boundary. You only have to enforce it. They'll demand reasons, push for justification, turn it into an argument. But this isn't a courtroom. Your boundary is not up for cross-examination. It's a locked door. Truth 30. You don't owe anyone access to the version of you they feel entitled to. You've grown. You've changed. You don't laugh at the same jokes. You don't chase like you used to. That isn't rudeness. It's revolution. And here's something Jung understood deeply but rarely stated outright. Every human soul has a gravitational pull, a psychological orbit that attracts situations equal to its self-concept. If you believe, I must be easy to love, you'll attract people who demand difficulty before they give affection. If you believe, I don't deserve too much, you'll find yourself settling for those who give just enough to keep you doubting. The universe doesn't hand you what you want. It mirrors who you think you are. That's why the work of facing these truths is so powerful. When you shift your self-concept, the entire orbit of your life changes. The people who once circled you drift away. The ones who belong begin to arrive. And now, we move into the final truths, the ones that protect your energy from subtle predators, that stop trauma bonds from masquerading as connection, that lead you to a life so rooted in self-respect that chaos no longer has a key to your door. Truth 31. Your peace will trigger those who rely on your chaos. The calmer you get, the louder they become. They can't find you in the old patterns anymore. Your silence, once mistaken for submission, has become your shield. And they hate it. Truth 32. If you have to beg someone to understand you, they are committed to misunderstanding you. Love doesn't require performance. You should never have to audition to be worthy. Truth 33. Some people don't want resolution. They want control. They stall, they provoke, they distract. Not to fix things, but to stay in power. Jung warned that when people fear their own unconscious, they attempt to control yours instead. Truth 34. The most dangerous gaslighting is the kind you do to yourself. You whisper, maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm asking for too much. But pause. Where did that voice come from? Who taught you that pain was normal? That voice isn't you. It's your training. Truth 35. Self-abandonment wears many disguises. It looks like loyalty. It looks like sacrifice. It even looks like spirituality. But if you ever disappear in order to stay connected, that isn't devotion. It's a wound pretending to be virtue. Truth 36. You are not difficult. You are simply unwilling to self-destruct quietly anymore. Let them call you what they will. Labels don't stick to those who know their truth. Truth 37. People who never had boundaries will always see yours as cruelty, but their discomfort is not your responsibility. You weren't born to carry their emotional illiteracy. Truth 38. Manipulators mistake empathy for access. They believe that if you understand them, you owe them. But understanding doesn't mean tolerating. It never has. Truth 39. You can love someone deeply and still choose yourself completely. That isn't selfish, it's sacred. Love doesn't mean depletion. It means fullness. Overflow. Truth 40. If your absence disturbed them more than your pain ever did, that wasn't love. It was dependency. They didn't miss you. They missed a version of you that never asked for more. Truth 41. The more healed you become, the more bored you'll be to people addicted to drama. They'll call you distant. They'll say you've changed. And they're right, because chaos no longer feels like home. Truth 42. If their version of love requires your exhaustion, it isn't love, it's performance. You are not meant to audition for care. Truth 43. Some people bond through wounds, not values. And when you start healing, the bond breaks. They didn't love you. They loved your pain. And when you stop bleeding, they leave. And finally, Truth 44. The ultimate form of self-respect is walking away quietly, without explanation, without needing them to understand. You don't need closure. You don't need a final word. You don't need to win. You just need to be done. Let me show you what that looks like. You wake up one morning, and there's no urge to check your phone. Not for their reply. Not to reread old messages. Not to rehearse your next offense. Because something inside of you is already closed. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You realize the apology will never come. The respect was never real. The love was always conditional. And instead of spiraling, you just breathe. You get up. You make tea. You stand in the light. You don't need revenge. You don't need validation. You don't need them to understand. You feel whole. This is a silent miracle Jung spoke of. The moment your identity is no longer defined by how others treat you, but by the way you treat yourself when no one is watching. The day you face the mirror and don't flinch. And then comes the question that lingers like smoke. What is the cost of staying small? What is the cost of being nice instead of honest, of keeping them comfortable while your soul suffocates? You've been trained to fear the consequences of truth. But what about the consequences of silence? Carl Jung once said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but that privilege is earned. Earned through grief, through shedding, through disappointing every person who only loved your camouflage. And here you are, still standing. You've remembered the truths. You've seen the patterns. You've stopped calling pain loyalty. You've stopped mistaking survival for love. And now something new begins. Now you begin to notice something. Your life starts to change in ways you didn't expect. You're not just surviving anymore, you're shifting. You become magnetic, not to everyone, but to the right ones, to those who recognize truth, to those who've done their own shadow work, to those who don't fear your depth, who honor your no as much as your yes. Your life becomes lighter, not because there's less weight, but because you finally stopped carrying what was never yours, the baggage of pleasing, the burden of silence, the exhaustion of proving your worth. You put it down, and suddenly you can breathe. Your days become quieter. Not because you're isolated, but because chaos no longer bangs on your door. You stop craving drama. You stop searching for storms. You stop needing the adrenaline of uncertainty. Quiet starts to feel like freedom, not emptiness. And your soul becomes louder, not in words, but in presence. You walk into rooms and people feel it. Something unspoken, something undeniable. It isn't arrogance. It isn't performance. It's alignment. The kind of power that doesn't need to shout, because it simply is. This is what it means to know all 44 truths. You're no longer available for self-erasure. You no longer mistake survival for connection. You no longer confuse potential for partnership. And you never again bleed just to prove you're worthy of being loved. You live, you breathe, you rest, and in your rest, you rise. But let me ask you this. How many years have you lost to the wrong lessons? To the belief that silence was safer, that endurance was loyalty, that shrinking was love? How much of your soul was given away to people who never earned the right to hold it? The cost of staying small is not just missed opportunities. It's the slow suffocation of your own becoming. And Jung knew, the longer you avoid your shadow, the longer you postpone the privilege of becoming who you truly are. That privilege doesn't come cheap. It demands grief. It demands shedding skins that once felt like home. It demands the courage to disappoint those who only loved your disguise. It asks you to stand naked before yourself, stripped of roles, stripped of masks, stripped of the lies you told just to belong. And in that moment, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see the pattern. You recognize the ways you called pain loyalty. You see the ways you mistaken anxiety for chemistry, chaos for love, attention for devotion. And you stop. You stop letting history repeat itself through your silence. Instead, you write something new. You stop needing their apology. You stop craving their recognition. You stop waiting for them to change. You realize the power has never been in their hands. It's been in yours, hidden beneath years of survival. So you take it back. Quietly, steadily, relentlessly. And with each step, you become less interested in who stays and more devoted to who you're becoming. Because the right ones, the true ones, will never fear your shadow. They'll never resent your boundaries. They'll never punish your no. They will meet you where you are, not where they can control you. This is sovereignty, not dominance, not control, but the quiet authority of someone who no longer negotiates their worth. You don't shout it. You don't prove it. You don't even need to explain it. You just live it. And in that living, something shifts. The orbit of your life recalibrates. The wrong ones fall away. The right ones draw near. And you, finally, fully you remain, because you face a mirror and didn't flinch. Because you let your false self die and buried it with dignity. Because you no longer confuse noise with love, exhaustion with devotion, silence with safety. You have become who you truly are. And now, you rise not as someone desperate to be chosen, but as someone who has already chosen themselves. That is a final gift of Jung's 44 truths. They're not just words. They're doors. And once you walk through them, there's no going back. You don't need closure. You don't need revenge. You don't need the world to applaud your healing. You only need to breathe, to stand in the light, to live as proof that survival is not the end of the story. Because you were never too sensitive. You were never too much. You were never wrong for wanting more. You were awake. And in a world that thrives on sleep, that was always your power. Now it is your freedom.